The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency, and as such the dollar makes up the majority of international reserves. Most international trade is denominated in dollars, and everyone just wants dollars in times of crisis. However, in the last couple of weeks or so there have been a number of headlines suggesting the dollar's dominance is coming under threat from the yuan. So analysts, and politicians on both sides of the aisle have started pressing that this could be the beginning of the end for the dollar as the world's reserve currency, and potentially the end for the US as financial hegemony more generally. So in this video, we're going to explain what a reserve currency is, why some people are so worried that the dollar is on the way out, and whether yuan could actually replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Hint: the answer is almost definitely no. So let's start with a brief explanation of what a global reserve currency actually is. A global reserve currency is essentially any currency that's traded and accepted across the world. Now, because these currencies are particularly safe in that they can reliably be used to buy other things, states and banks tend to hold significant amounts of currencies in their reserves. Hence, the name reserve currency, and since the end of World War II, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency. As such, today about half of all international transactions, including the majority of oil purchases, are denominated in dollars, and most people borrow money in dollars too. And surprisingly, this means that dollars are accepted as a legitimate currency basically anywhere in the world, which is why dollars account for the majority of reserves, and why people only want dollars in times of this. Take the last couple of years as an example. As turbulence swept through the global economy, investors returned to the dollar in their droves, pushing the dollar to a 20-year high. Anyway, the dollar's status as a reserve currency bestows the US with what the French Minister of Finance once described as an exorbitant privilege. Essentially, because there's always a demand for dollars, the US has more purchasing power than other countries, and the US government can borrow more money than other countries, and the US can also use the dollar's dominance and America's dominance over the global financial system more generally to effectively sanction its enemies, as it did when they expelled Russia out of the SWIFT interbank messaging system. Now, this dominance and this power is something that both Russia and China have complained about in the past after its financial crisis in the 90s, which forced many Russians to use the dollar instead of the ruble. The Russian parliament banned public officials from using dollars as a unit of account, and Dmitry Medvedev actually proposed a so-called super currency to replace the dollar in 2009. And when it comes to China, just a couple of months ago, the Chinese Foreign Ministry published The Perils of American Hegemony, which complained that the dollar is the main source of instability and uncertainty in the world economy, and argued that the US uses the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency to coerce other countries into serving America's political and economic strategy. Anyway, with the two sides agreed, just last week, Russia and China finally decided to do something about it, with Putin pledging to adopt the yuan as the currency of account for payments between Russia and countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America in a bid to displace the dollar. At the same time, there are a slew of other headlines about Brazil, France, and Saudi Arabia also moving away from the dollar. Now, this sparks some major anxiety in America. For instance, Fox News ran a panicked piece talking about how if the US lost its status as the world's reserve currency, that would mean a complete implosion of the American economy, Weimar Republic kind of inflation, and America losing its superpower status. Yes, Fareed Zakaria made a similar claim to warning CNN viewers that the US wouldn't be able to afford its deficits if the US dollar lost its status as the world's reserve currency. So is this really the end for the dollar and the US's power financially and politically? Well, no, not really. For starters, China and Russia made similar announcements in both 2009 and 2013, and not much in either instance. Plus, the claim that Brazil ditched the dollar isn't even really all that true. All that happened is that one bank in Brazil agreed to join China's new interbank payment system, which is why its announcement only made the 8th bullet point in a minor government press release. And this resilient bank also tried to do the same thing in 2009 and 2013 to no effect. Secondly, while multiple minor news outlets have reported that France is buying LNG in yuan, they all cite the same rate as report, and we couldn't even find the original report. Anyway, thirdly, the Wall Street Journal article only claims that the Saudis are considering switching to the yuan, but nothing has actually happened yet. It's also worth saying that these headlines reoccur every few years. This one is from 2004. This is from 2007. This is from 2011. Evan, this is from 2018. And we even found this one from 1975. And every time these predictions ended up being wrong. Now, while it is true that the dollar's proportion of global reserves has sunk from 72% in 1999 to 59% today, this is largely because developing countries no longer peg their currencies to the dollar, but the dollar is still by far and away the world's most popular currency. It's also used for the majority of international trade everywhere in the world, apart from Europe, which uses the euro for obvious reasons for context. The euro accounts for about 3% of global reserve portfolios, and just 2% of international trade is denominated in the yuan. And that actually overstates things as well, because 1.5% of that 2% is between Hong Kong and mainland China. So if you exclude that the new yuan actually does less international trade than the Mexican peso or the Polish zloty. Now, that doesn't mean that this will always be true. The yuan may well become more popular in the future. As we said, Russia is now agreeing to use it. NT-BOC is trying to increase the yuan's usage by extending swap lines to other central banks in Southeast Asia. These trends might also be accelerated by continued chaos in the US banking system or possibly even the introduction of a digital yuan. But fundamentally, the yuan just can't replace the dollar because that would require the BOC to allow people to freely trade the yuan. Now, currently the BOC doesn't let this happen because they like to control the value of the yuan. And that's because generally, China likes their currency to be undervalued because they are an export-based economy, and as such, an undervalued makes their exports more competitive. As such, if the BOC want to maintain this control, the yuan just can't become the global reserve currency because currently countries aren't able to easily purchase and sell it to us. This is one of big reasons why the pound became the world's reserve currency before the war, and the dollar became the world's reserve currency after it. On top of that, being the world's reserve currency usually makes your currency overvalue, use which would involve a complete restructuring of China's economy.